I want to thank you very much for being here today for this University Hour. My name is John Murphy. I teach in the Communication, Film, and Theater Department. I've been here for 41 years because I love teaching and I love the spirit of this school that is being challenged today by so many issues involving technology and managing technology, helping it to grow the right way and protecting us from abuses. So you have the whole idea of STEAM versus STEM. And what I want to do today is have just a little conversation about that from the viewpoint of the work that you're doing and how we're addressing it. I'd like to begin by thanking a couple of people to make our day possible. This is my first University Hour, so I'm very happy to have this opportunity. I want to thank the University Hour Committee and the Provost's Office, the University Event Services, catering services. There's plenty of food out there if you're inspired. Student activities staff, university relations, media services is recording this to share, so thank you all very much for making this possible. And also I want to thank Jaime Gomez, who is a professor emeritus here. He was my department chair for many years. When he heard about this event today, he sent me an article from former President Elsa Nunez that is perfect for our conversation today. It's a little time travel looking at this issue from 15 years ago. It's an article she wrote for the Christian Science Monitor, July 25, 2011, on page 34. It's called Liberate Liberal Arts from the Myth of Irrelevance. And it really hit a button for me, and I'm so glad Jaime shared it. So thank you for sharing this with me, because these are points that will frame our conversation today. Because we're going to break our conversation into three sections. So first, for the opening, I just want to mention a couple of things. What our article highlighted, and I just want to read a couple of excerpts because it was perfect for me to share this with you. It is time to liberate the liberal arts from being portrayed as disconnected from the real world. This historical perception is largely inaccurate today, as more and more institutions of higher learning are seeking ways to bring relevance and application to the liberal arts. Part of the issue today is the role of our media in our conversation space, how people learn information, how they make decisions, and how they treat each other. And right now, as we try to debate these values, the media, for me, is very much a part of the problem, as much as they're a tool. And we have kind of a dilemma today, because the media today has a mixed bag. A lot of people are yelling. I'm not sure why the fourth thing was out of there. It was there earlier today. But a lot of people are yelling. There's not much conversation. It's pretty much one way, and you're talking largely to people who agree with you, and finding ground for common dialogue is getting harder to find. People look at polarities like it's either one way or the other, and there's no peace. One side has to win, which means one side has to lose. It means you no longer have a loyal opposition. You can argue, but stay together. You can work out issues. You win some, you lose some. But thinking in polarities is old school. It's old world thinking. And the way we are today with the abundance that we have in our hands that we're largely wasting, that's a bad way to think. The last one there was one of my favorite images. It's from Edgar Allan Poe's Descent into the Maelstrom. It's a short story that paints a picture, and I won't go into the whole detail, but it's a powerful analogy for what's happening today. A ship at sea hits a storm. It's breaking apart. It's in pieces. There's a vortex. Everything is flying around. People are drowning and yelling. But one sailor notices these heavy trunks that are not fighting the water. They're going with it. They're moving in a circular pattern. And as these heavy objects stay stable in the storm, they go out of the vortex. So what he does is he holds on to one for dear life, and he rides it out of the storm. So what he did was he watched his environment. He watched his perceptions of what was happening around him, and he adapted, and he survived. People who fought the current drowned, because it didn't work. So it's a very short story, but it's a very powerful analogy today when people in education are facing changing realities, changing values, changing governments, but the issues are still the same. How do you prepare people? How do you get people ready to do good things for the world? There's the other one. I don't know why it came up. It's Murphy's Law. This is where people are trapped in their silos. You have a point of view, you have an ethical value, you stay there, and trying to mix things is very difficult. There's a lot more confrontation. At least that's what the media shows us. The media shows us the conflicts, not the quiet victories that are happening. You've all seen rainbows. I love them. It's a beautiful thing. But one thing I love to share in my class is that when you look at a rainbow, that's not all of what it is. You're on the ground. You just see a little piece. But if you're in a plane at 47,000 feet, this is what the media can do for you if they do their job. They can show you the whole rainbow. That's the whole image. And remember, the Earth is a sphere, so when you look at a rainbow, you're just seeing the arc from the top. But this is the whole thing. And that's where I think media needs to help us, is to find that part of the picture that we don't have access to. And no one's at fault for it, it's just the way it is. But how do you connect things? How do you connect people and ideas in a way that avoids conflict? And it sounds really naive, but that's all we have left to do, because we've done everything else. So what I want to do here briefly is point out one thing before we go. Across the country, there are news deserts. All those yellow dots are towns with only one paper. Other areas have no press at all. So it's a real situation where people trying to get information are having a harder time. The internet's full of it, but you don't know what to trust. And one of our original medium, the newspapers, one of our original truth tellers is compromised today, and they're trying to survive in new ways. So the environment that we're working in is very challenged. And I just took a couple of minutes to set this stage because when you look at STEAM and STEM and how to resolve it, these are about values and how people who vote, who approve budgets, where do they get their information from to make a decision that says yes or no? It's a hard process. So that's where we'll stop for the moment. And the first part of our conversation is where they diverge. Where does science and technology and values separate? And I want to read one short thing from Elsa's article again. If the preferred educational path to ensure adaptability is a liberal arts education, most college students today are not buying it. In the mid-50s, 25% of all students enrolled in the liberal arts, a figure that fell to 8% by the early 70s and 3% in 2000. Remember, her article is 15 years ago. 70 to 80% of college freshmen list the following as their reason for attending college: earning more money, finding a job, and preparing for a career. Those three things. This preoccupation with the short term, unfortunately, is based on an old labor market model that presumes job specialization is the key to success. This model doesn't work in a modern economy where adaptability is the key. Specializing is okay, but you have to be flexible and adaptable. And liberal arts is a way to travel that territory. So what I want to do now is open it up for any comments or thoughts about how these two forces are diverging, how they're not together, how there's still the idea of technology should be left alone, the business model should be unleashed without constraint to allow maximum creativity. Other people are saying technology has effects and consequences, and it needs to be mediated. So in this environment, do you have any thoughts to share about that? Alex has a microphone. And I thank those of you that are here today to make a conversation out of this, because I set this up to provide some conversation about how do we think about this in our own ways.
Whenever I see like this kind of thing, it's an artificial divide, right? So like my job, I do a lot of STEM stuff, but I'm in the art world. So, and people don't think about that. I think when most people think about science, technology, engineering, and math, they think of it as something separate from art, but it's really not. So when you were talking about those polarities before,
yeah.
I think that applies here for sure. And if we could get out of that that mindset of polarization when it comes to these things, like that's what the liberal arts is all about.
Right. You remember, Eastern is the state's designated liberal arts institution, so there's a special mission here that has a history that goes way before the internet came along, by the way. Any other thoughts? Thank you.
I would say that, I feel like the arts are where our humanity is. Obviously, like, the arts are sometimes thought of as like a humanities discipline, perhaps, which would be separate from STEM disciplines. But, in today's world, it's so technology-driven, of course. We have artificial intelligence taking off. Anything that can sort of like foster that humanity, whether it's music or theater, it might not have like a dollar sign, it might not have a direct economic, like result on your benefit, but in terms of like dollar signs, but anything that can kind of develop that humanity and that's what also bridges divides and brings people together. And,
it can.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real tough spot to be in when everything is so bottom line driven right now. And I don't know how that is more effectively sold to the masses, but I feel like it's pretty obvious in today's world that we need a little bit more humanity. So if the liberal arts and the arts in general can do that, then it has my vote. Obviously, I think that there is still room, like you said, for specialization and learning these other hard disciplines.
It's like people years ago that said, well, you just have to learn code, learn COBOL, learn that stuff. Well, I don't, you don't start out that way anymore. So when things change that fast, you have to be able to adapt. And the other thing that's happening now is that Europe is so far ahead of the US in regulating some of the technology and impacts on privacy and personal security. They're really ahead of us in many laws. But one thing that's happening is AI is so powerful that people are saying you have to unleash it, because if you don't, the Chinese will do it. If we don't do it, somebody else will do it, and we'll have to deal with the bad things when they happen. Some people are saying, no, you have to watch until you let the genie out of the bottle. If somebody else goes first, too bad. It doesn't mean you have to. And AI has brought out some incredible opportunity for technology applications to save lives, for the medical field, diagnoses, certain things that could be done very quickly. But it's the politics. It's the politics of access to it that makes it very divisive. And it gets to be where the government doesn't even know what to do anymore. Most of our legislators were born before the internet. They don't know the ethics. They don't know the reality. They read about it. But they don't understand, really. This is their challenge, but they're in charge right now. They're voting on this stuff. And how do you educate them without appearing to be a lobbyist for a company with a financial interest? Because right now in Congress, for every reporter walking around, there are 4 lobbyists. It's a 4-to-1 ratio of technology lobbying in Congress versus reporters trying to figure out what's going on. But these are the polarities that I think Kristen said, they're kind of artificial, but it's a mixture of the old and the new world, and they're not really mixing as well as they could. So the next slide is, where's the common ground? What makes it work better? How do we overcome these artificial differences? So I'm going to go back to Elsa's article again. Thank you, Elsa, wherever you are. When you consider today's modern technology-driven workplace, a liberal arts education begins to make more sense. Every employee in a successful business must be able to think creatively and act quickly, sometimes alone, but more often in concert with other equally competent people. Technology skills, the talent to gather and analyze data, the capacity to consider alternative options in solving problems, and the ability to communicate one's viewpoint orally and in writing must be found across all layers of an organization. So that communication skill is the glue that finds the common ground where people can work together and find new projects, new ways to have technology applications approved. Because they're always coming up now. We're talking about geothermal versus wind and solar, hydro from Canada being cut off. Everybody needs to be able to adapt to these changing circumstances. But in your thinking and experience, are there areas where you think there are common grounds where we have to spend more time in order to find a language that can lead to solutions that are still elusive? And we do have so much money. We have so much money. People talk about scarcity. If you travel the world, you know what people are dealing with. We are fortunate to be here. But the question is, how do we make this sustainable? How does it last for everybody else? So are there thinkings in this? It gets very naive, I know. People are struggling. There'll be a pop quiz after this session.
It's a loaded question, man.
It is loaded. It's loaded, that's right. Because they're hard to ask the right way without having somebody think that you have an answer you're selling. But it's an open space. It's why they made Socrates drink hemlock. It's the open zone where you think things out. No comments. Then we'll move on.
No, I could comment.
Please do.
I just have to.
I've got the mic, though. Please, I want to capture all the comments. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, no, it's just a long day.
It is.
I'm a computer science major, actually. I feel like I'm probably one of the few from the computer science department that would probably find myself here. Because before I was doing computers, I did art, and before, not as a career, but I drew in my time, and I make tabletop games, and I do things that are inherently creative. And there is a distinct there is an overlap between the two. When I was younger, I was one of those people that was like, oh, it's STEM, not STEAM. But it was Weavers that helped put us on the moon, because managing all those wires and sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's something that when I walk into my computer science classes, I realize that there is there's like a divide. And it's not like a, I guess, terribly noticeable one, and I'm sure that many of the people in there, they don't care as much. But I realize that there are people who are, more creatively inclined, such as myself, and then there are people that are not. And for the people that are not, they do incline very much towards the just getting a job and getting something done, and it's not very creatively done. It is very rigid, I suppose, and they lose a sort of, how to word this? They lose an art of communication, I think. One of my classes is just writing papers about how the topic in class works, which I'll leave anonymous simply out of respect. But the papers are cut and dry. There's no room for iteration or for actually expanding creatively on any of this. We all treat it as though it's been done. It's been written in the sand, chisels in stone, that's it. And it's not. And it's the arts and that sort of art of communication that would help it further. And I find the more interesting conversations to be with people in computer science who do participate in some sort of art on their own. And I just think it's interesting, that sort of divide, and yet how more articulate and more, I guess, prepared and just interesting the people that actually do participate in some sort of art while also being computer science are, which is not a slight at anyone who doesn't, but more just a personal sort of opinion, I suppose.
That's a good point, because if people do some homework on their own, one of the good things about all this new technology is it lets people with like minds connect in new ways to do things that only a few years ago would have been either impossible or they would have taken twice the time. So there's so much possibility. I don't want to let any of my criticisms make you think I'm cynical, because I'm actually optimistic. But I think people need to be cynical to get through the hype, because people make their money that way. And we have to realize that this is largely about making money. And one of the saddest things I can say, that I've been teaching here 41 years, and I think one of the saddest things that's happened in our country is the fundamental relationship between an employer and a worker has been fractured. No loyalty. Nobody stays 30 years in one place anymore because they get fired before they get too long because they get too much money. The companies really don't treat workers the way they could. They get paid well, but they're disposable. They might drive a fancy car with a very fancy suit, but the next financial quarter, we'll find out how long they stay. It is wicked out there, and this isn't gladiator talk, and this isn't like, oh, you're a wimpy guy. It's realizing that the environment has changed. And if that's where people start out with that attitude, that's a whole life trap of how you're treated that way forever. And how do employers, the turnover rate today is one of the issues. If you're in the business community, one of their biggest problems is constant turnover. People are unhappy where they are. But if you hire people, it takes a lot of time to get a new worker employed and trained, to get that team chemistry going. And when people leave right away because they're not treated well, everybody suffers. And it's like short-term thinking for the next quarter or the next year, but not long-term. So I hope some of these business issues will be resolved, and the debate about art and technology, how people treat each other, can provide an area for conversation. And that's what we're trying to do here today, is figure out where can we talk? Where can we find a safe space like this when you can talk and your job isn't at risk, your political situation is insecure, because things are challenging today. So that's where we are with this, and I wanted to go one more step. Are there any more thoughts, though, on this aspect of common ground where we can find positive thinking? Thank you very much. Thanks, Alex, for getting that mic. Because it's really about where do we go from here to make things better? Thank you.
So one thing that earlier this week, I have 2 kids that are in kindergarten and 2nd grade, and our town had a STEAM fair. And so it was really just interesting from such a young age that there's opportunities to explore kind of this intersection of science and art. There were things like 3D printing where it's very science-based, but then they're making art pieces with it. They showed how to make a green screen become a background with a photo. So it's
Right.
The intersection of science, technology, and art is at such a young age was really kind of cool to see all these examples. But I think also just in terms of applying that to the workplace, say it's kind of the as Mike mentioned, kind of the human aspects that I think is what kind of sets folks apart from what would be, say, like AI, and because, say, if you're creating a website, you need to know kind of the code of it and know kind of the logistics to make it happen, but it's someone who knows kind of has the perspective of the art to be like, all right, is this visually appealing? Is this good user interface experience? So knowing the psychology and the sociology behind that as well, it all kind of intersects with various projects where if you bring all that to the table, then it really creates a better product and kind of a better work experience.
Yeah, but you got to put it all on the table, right? Mm-hmm. Exactly, right.
Add to that, like,
Please.
It's like they inform each other. Like with technology, you can create art, and with art, you can innovate your technology. So they kind of like it's like a convection with the two of them, and they shouldn't be separate. They should work in tandem because they really do like help each other progress and advance.
They do, and that's part of the process of life that you'll encounter anyway. Whatever you do, you'll have some of that. That's one of the good things about Eastern, I think, not to blow our horn, but with the liberal arts base here, you have a foundation for life that you can specialize as much as you want, but you have your foundation first. You don't put your foundation on a specialization that comes and goes. So it's like, where are your feet planted? And when you learn about the liberal arts, you also learn about responsibility, you learn about business, but we know that we have an extremely well-educated, rich, powerful group of people that are highly educated that are choosing to damage our nation. for their self-interest. This is not a big deal. This is true. Education does not save us from those people because they have access, they have resources, and they do what they want as far as the law allows them. Business schools really have to carefully teach those ethics at a young age because for some people that's what they see. And that's the Maya. And that's the old century that we're trying very hard to deal with in the new. How do you find the common ground which acknowledges the past, acknowledges the manipulation and the fraud, but saying, well, we have businesses, we have to do better with our technology. So that's kind of where we go back and forth. Okay, we're going to move to our next section here after looking at the common ground. And now it's more about the function of our education today, not a little bit of Hollywood here. But I've been here 41 years, and the last few years I've worked with freshmen and first and second year students. And this world is different for them than it was for me. They're leaving high school less prepared, less aware, and less confident. In many cases because their parents are not funding their high school education. Towns are cheap sometimes. I know it's tough to pay the mill rate, but the kids are the future. If you're going to have a surgeon on your heart one day, what do you think about? So that's a tasteless joke. But the idea is kids are coming here, and Eastern is spending resources helping them catch up because they're leaving high school a little compromised. And I'm not criticizing high school teachers because they do the best they can with the limited resources that they've been given. They do wonderful work. But the system as a whole has not done as well for young kids as it has in the past. So this environment is undefined. The territory is unsure. You're not quite sure what's safe, but you're in an area called a university which you think is a safe space. So I can talk, I can make mistakes, I can screw up, I can do all the things that I do when I'm at that age, but this space for me is safe. So it's more than just the degree, it's how you got the degree. It's not the paper, but what can you do with the paper? So that's part of the mixture, I think, that makes education so critical today to help our country. This is the big debate. This is now a debatable thing. Fake news, alternate facts. I'm not going to repeat that because we're overloaded. Well, this is right in the way. We're overloaded, but this is where people have to find their peace in order to make a decision. Young people need to figure something out to know what's the value that's most important to me. Because some of my opportunities before me might not be good for me personally, but they're there. They're tempting. So the idea of true and false is how the school helps students think for themselves, be critical. You're not going to get the Socrates milkshake here. Go ahead and get dangerous. This is what this place is for, is to walk the line. And that's the last slide because that's the worst problem that we all have. We're the richest country. We have the richest world in history with the most physical assets, and we're burning them up. There's not distribution. It doesn't make you a communist to say this wealth has to be shared differently. The world is not working as well as it could. And some of us have been comfortable for a real long time, and we're not aware of what the other half of the planet is going to every day. And the more that we ignore that, the fire's coming. You see the smoke? The fire's coming. STEM and STEAM is how you figure out how to put that money to use in a good way that takes values and technology in life and puts it together beyond the private interest. There's a place for that, but when you're talking about life and what higher education is all about, that is the least of it, because that's the easiest pitch. So anyway, that's kind of where this goes for the moment. I just want to thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts today. And I want to thank President Ismaili for coming by. You said you would stop by, and I thank you very much. Would you like to share a thought to put you on the spot at all? Let's give a mic.
I thought you were auditioning for president. Wasn't that amazing? Everything you said there, John, I agree with.
Please turn on the mic.
Everything you said there.
Yeah.
You know, you're identifying sort of the crux of many issues that we're facing. And yeah, you're right. Yeah, you don't have to be a communist to sort of believe that, You know, the richest country in the world, the richest hemisphere in the world can
That's right.
to think about, you know, what are our values? Education, supporting the students that are, you know, that need extra support. You know, we are constantly trying to, you know, we're basically putting hand in hand and saying, please support us. We're a public institution. You know, the value should be self-evident, but unfortunately it isn't.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, this whole concept of how we think about what we deliver, how we deliver it, the programs within STEM and STEAM, that just provides a sense of the richness of what we provide. So so thank you for bringing us together. Yes, I did say, I'm sorry that I'm late.
No, thank you very much for being here at all.
But I'm happy to be here now.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Does anybody have any other thoughts that you might want to share? Because, you know, we're looking ahead. The state funding is unsure. The mission is the same. You do the best you can with what you have. But the challenge today is for parents to think longer term, to make sure that in their towns they're supporting their local schools. Because that's the future. You're giving them all the keys to the car, man. They're all getting the keys to the car. And the quality that we put in them is going to be the quality of the drive. You can't live life in a driverless car. As much as people might like the idea, I think it's insane myself. But anyway, yes, Kristen, another thought. Thank you.
So I live in Tolland, and last night there was a Board of Ed budget meeting, and the room where they held it was at capacity, and there were people waiting in line to get in and give testimony. And then they had Zoom set up, but it was only for 100 people, so nobody could get in. So now they're going to have another meeting, but people are really upset about the lack of funding over the past 15 years that I've lived there, and then I moved there for the school districts because they were good. And I think that people aren't seeing the value of education today, and not a liberal arts education either.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is the money. It's expensive to go to college today. You know, when I went, I was very fortunate that my parents paid for school for me, and I recently was looking through some old files and I found the bills. I went to Virginia Tech and it was very cheap back then. It was maybe $4,000 a year for tuition, room, and board.
Yeah.
And today, there's a tension between how much an education costs and what parents and students want them to get out of that education. So I think that's why we're seeing that people consider college as just like, oh, I need it to get a job, or I need it to like train for my career, instead of seeing it as this opportunity to study all kinds of things that are going to inform your career, because your career is not going to stay the same. It's going to change. So the more you know about different areas of the liberal arts and different ways that people do research and creative activities in these different areas. I don't know what the answer is, but thank you for starting the conversation on it today.
Yeah, thank you too. I wasn't sure what would happen because it wasn't about having a panel of people talking to you. It was more about what your thoughts were about where things are today. Did you have a thought? Please.
I think it comes down to the crux of the issue is that we need to have, I don't think we can focus on education until we have people's needs met to a degree. I pay for my own college. My parents are retirement age. They can't contribute. And I've been at a point where I've worked 2 part-time jobs and being full-time in college. And that's not easy.
No.
And there comes a point where it is very easy to just think that you need it to get an education because you can't look farther than 1 foot in front of you, because if you don't, where's homelessness? Where's my next meal, you know?
That's right.
And I feel like there needs to come a point where we focus on, with the resources we have now, to try and get people to a level where they can see a few steps in front of them. And then there comes a point where we can actually start to encourage people to look into things that are, you know, more in the arts and the humanities. We can have people in STEM look more towards that way, and people in art, you know, get more comfortable with technologies and how they can be innovated. But I don't think we can make that progress there until we've gotten people out of survival and into living. And I think, honestly, in some way, even though we might be the richest country, there's some places that are doing a lot better with that than we are.
Oh, for sure.
Poorly with it, I'd say.
Yeah.
We're very willing to treat people as expendable, especially computer science. I know people with masters in computer science. I know someone who has a master who was just laid off the other day. Just got the job, laid off maybe a few months later just because, sorry, we didn't need you anymore. And the amount
Yeah.
of people, jobs out there that are just for AI that replace the job you just signed up for is heinous. And it's crazy.
That's what I was saying before about how the basic relationship between an employer and an employee is broken. The trust isn't there, the dedication, the respect isn't there, and in the long run, that breaks the game. Because without the workers, you don't have a business. Without customers, you don't have workers, because workers are often customers. Yes, please, one more. Alex, you're getting your weight. There we go. All right.
Hi. So yeah, we were talking about how people are so just, you can get discarded like out of nowhere and stuff. But I think that I wanted to say that when we were talking about the overlapping between STEM and the arts, mostly with humanities. I think just STEM without humanities it just makes you evil, because like what's the point in like discovering all this stuff and doing all these great things if you're not going to benefit society, if you're not going to help your neighbor? What's the point? So STEM without humanities is like you're just incomplete and evil. So don't do it. And I'm like so grateful that I came here to Eastern. I'm a freshman, but I'm like so grateful that
Welcome.
I'm using my full right to come here, because I feel like I'm getting, a well-rounded education, and all the creativity, all the critical thinking skills. People lack those these days. They really need critical thinking skills. I don't know. I think people should, focus more on the humanities side to be more complete and benefit society in positive ways. Yeah, of course. Thank you.
A couple more comments in the back, please. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm from Econ and Finance Department. I would say at least in investing in my field, it's a combination of art and STEM. So when it comes to making investment decision, we not just rely on, say, math, rely on the calculation of those financial measures and ratios, etc. And we also need to use knowledge we obtain from other fields in this financial decision-making process. And as a student, I did have a lot of fun when I took STEM courses, but when I took arts, like these liberal art courses, in fact, I find I had more fun. I enjoy much more than just solving math problems and doing all those kind of calculus statistics. So I would say arts education, liberal art education is very important, although right now we are in this STEM age, but I highly encourage my students to learn a broad range of subjects in a different discipline that helps for their career in the longer term, not just to say get a STEM degree and then hopefully find a dream job in some high-tech company and make a decent pay. I would say eventually by learning those STEM courses, people can acquire skills, but taking arts courses, and we can become a well-rounded human being, not just like a tool, like a robot, and who can do math and do stats, like those testing and a lot of very geek stuff. So I think our education is quite important, especially in this age.
Thank you. And I saw one more hand there. Yes. Thank you again.
I think that also the term liberal has been something that makes maybe parents or students who lean different ways politically kind of have a certain connotation with a liberal arts university, where they politicize like liberal versus conservative, where that's not necessarily what liberal means in this sense. And so I think having parents and students be able to see this is a liberal arts university and not think, oh, there's a bunch of people who are liberally politically leaning or the other necessarily, that's a little bit of a hurdle to kind of overcome or just figure out how to do that just because of that word being a little bit more high charged when liberal just in this context is not necessarily has that meaning. So I think especially when say marketing ourselves to potential students and we're saying we're a liberal arts university, but when people hear that word liberal, it makes people feel different ways. So it's I think trying to figure out how to approach that as well.
I think you have a good point, because one of the sad things today is it's so politically polarized that the word is so connected to conservative liberal that the history of the word going back hundreds of years is lost in terms of what it means to be liberal. And this is a good reference to Elsa's article again, because she starts out by saying, it is time to liberate the liberal arts from being portrayed as disconnected from the real world. That's the cliche. Oh yeah, I want to deal with the real. Well, this is how you understand and judge and evaluate the real world. That's kind of where the education process is so critical today. And we have such an issue of disregard for labor that the idea of somebody not going to school is viewed as a failure. It's like, how low is that? Unless you go to school, you won't have a life. There's all kinds of ways to be. There's all kinds of work out there, and not all work requires a university degree, but it's part of our survival and our need. And if we respected people more in different kinds of work, there might be less resentment against those who are fortunate enough to go to school, who have resources, who are trying to do good things, but not everybody can get to school. It's a blessing to be here. I've seen it for many years just as a teacher. I know what they go through to be here. And more respect for work across the board would help everybody to feel tighter with each other, less class issues where education becomes a class divide. That's a sad thing for a country. That's an old way. But anyway, I see our time is getting close soon. Are there any last thoughts? I wanted to just mention, yes, Alex.
I guess I'll close it.
There you go.
One of the things that I was thinking of, especially during the portion of the media, was that when I was growing up, the 24/7 news world was pretty much, at least to my knowledge, just CNN.
They were the first.
They were the first, definitely.
Yeah.
But then world events such as 9/11 came around, and that just kind of spawned more and more 24/7 news. And it's gotten to the point where anybody really with a microphone can have something to say, which in general I think is good, because we want to hear more opinions. But it also has a double-edged sword on it, because then you have those individuals who have maybe certain ideas or certain agendas, however you want to call it, that are not bringing anything positive to the conversation. And it's really, really hard to find sincere, neutral news these days. I know I've seen these little diagrams of like all the news medias, and they try to, put them as to which one is.
Oh, their bias chart? Yeah, they're bias charts. Yeah, that's right.
But even then, I find it really is up to ourselves to put together what is it that is, in a sense, the truth, which is unfortunate. We have to not only have an open mind, but also be willing to do the research. Because just because you think, all right, I don't quite believe that, but if you don't do anything about it, then you're just kind of stuck. You have to put in the effort. You have to put in the research. Don't take someone else's word as the truth, whether you believe them or not. So again, that's one thing I have seen a lot with media. And it's something that I wish that it changes soon. I don't know if it'll happen, but it's something I wish that does.
Yeah, that's a good note to close on too, because you use the term media literacy in our classes a lot. It's not making you cynical, it's just more aware that every message has an agenda. You have to know where the message comes from, what's their point of view, what are they asking you to do, and never take one point of view. Always get multiple sources more than ever, because everything is democratized that you mentioned, Alex. The beauty is everybody's on the web. It's a recent phenomenon in history that everybody can be like the New York Times. You can post like Godzilla. But the thing is, you got to be careful. You got to trust. You got to make sure that what you get is correct. So it just means more work. People have to be a little bit more careful, more mindful today, and certainly more conversations with people, more public conversations like this, getting involved in some way. Because the more you talk, it overcomes the fear and the doubt, and it leaves you with a more optimistic feeling, which is how I'm trying to close our time today. As difficult as things are, the opportunities are awesome. Being here in school opens the door to a beautiful life for everybody, if they can get here. The process has to be saved. This is not a factory. This is creating art that happens to use technology. But that human element is what the liberal arts is all about. That's why Eastern is here, and it goes way back before any of us were here. So I want to thank you very much for being here today. I know everybody is very, very busy. I thank you for sharing your thoughts, and I wish you a good year ahead. Thank you.